Ready? All right. Welcome to St. Anthony's Spirituality Center and our 2021 Know Your Faith series on social justice teachings. My name is Marge Lindell. I'm a resident here at St. Anthony's, have been for about 2 years. My co-resident is Tracy on the video and camera. Before we get started, I have a few things I want to go through. Because we are recording this session tonight, I'm going to ask that everyone hold their questions until the end. And then we will turn on, right now, the Zoom participants have their video and audio off, and they need to remain off so we don't lose our PowerPoint presentation. But then when we get to the Q&A part, we will turn those videos back on so everybody can see everybody. The Zoom participants will receive an email tomorrow with a survey to complete. The people who are here, there's a evaluation form with your papers on your desk. And we ask that you would provide us some feedback on how tonight goes. This is our first experiment with this, with a in-person and virtual and recorded Zoom presentation. We've also not charged a fee for this program, but we are requesting free will donations. There's a basket for the people who are here in person. For those who are online, Tracy, you want to pull up that slide for me? There we go. So you can donate on our website, and the address is there. You can donate on our Facebook page. You can mail a check to St. Anthony's, or you can call our office number to donate by credit card. We appreciate anything that you offer to us. It helps us out tremendously. One of the reasons we're able to do this little hybrid model with people participating virtually and people in person is thanks to a grant from the Franciscan Sisters of Perpetual Adoration in La Crosse. They gave us a grant that bought the computer and the camera and the microphone and all of the software and everything that we needed to do this. So they were very generous to us and we appreciate it very much. For a little background on our series, most of you know that St. Anthony's opened in 1919 as a house of study, school of theology for brothers in the Capuchin Franciscan order who were studying for the priesthood. They spent their last 4 years here before ordination. And while they lived a monastic life behind the walls as students, they also were engaged in outreach beyond the walls. And one of the principal ministries they were engaged in when they were living here was religious education. So it wasn't just their education they were here for, they were educating others. One of the ways they did that was by serving in various area parishes as religious education instructors. They ran a correspondence course for people who were studying to become Catholic. And for a few years, they did a television series called Know the Truth that was broadcast primarily through Channel 7 in Wausau, but eventually to other stations around the state. When we were planning for our centennial celebrations from 2017 to 2019, one of the things we did was create this Know Your Faith series as a tribute to the Capuchins' Know the Truth television series. The social justice theme for this year's presentations is also a tribute to the Capuchins, because another one of their charisms is service to the poor and the marginalized. In fact, that's probably the main reason they closed the seminary here in 1970 and moved it to more urban areas so that their students could be involved in social justice outreach. Perhaps the best known role model of social justice in the Capuchin community was born right here in the Diocese of La Crosse, and that's Blessed Solanus Casey. He was born in Prescott, Wisconsin, and raised in areas of Northwest Wisconsin. And he was well known for the compassion that he showed toward all people, and whether that was people who needed prayer or people who just needed someone to listen to, or people who, during the Great Depression when he was in Detroit, many people were out of work and needed food, and they would come to the St. Bonaventure's, and he would go to their kitchen and get them soup and bread and something so they would have something to eat. That ministry eventually led to the Capuchins starting the Capuchin Soup Kitchen. And that ministry continues today in Detroit. Our lower level conference room here at St. Anthony's is named in honor of Blessed Solanus Casey. So, time for me to shut up and let people who know more about social justice than I do talk. Tonight we have Father Steve Bryce and Bob Walensky here to do our presentation. Father Steve has been a priest of the Diocese of La Crosse for almost 40 years. But his connection to St. Anthony's goes back to the mid-70s when he was a resident here. Father Steve is currently the pastor at Holy Spirit Parish in Stevens Point, but he's been an advocate for social justice issues wherever he has served. I knew him when he was at St. Anne's in Wausau as being a very hands-on person, but also very hands-off, because it was very important to him to empower others to work for and create and do whatever they wanted to in whatever area of social justice was their passion. So whether it was digging wells, water wells in Africa, or going down to serve on mission trips, or Father Steve was there, but he was not the one in the lead. He would let other people take the lead. Bob Walensky is Professor Emeritus of Sociology and Social Work at Stevens Point, University of Wisconsin-Stevens Point, and an adjunct professor of History and Sociology at King's College in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania. He's published a number of articles and books on labor and social injustice issues, is active in his parish, and served on diocesan committees on the Campaign for Human Development and Catholic Relief Services. So, if you would help me please welcome Father Steve Bryce and Bob Walensky.
Thank you, Marge.
You're welcome.
Make us look good. I see my purpose as twofold. One, I suppose that you're here because you are passionate about social justice, but just maybe somebody is here who is watching is wondering, we're Catholic. We're about spiritual things. What are we doing talking about economics and sociology and all of that? What's that got to do with being Catholic? So I want to answer that question. And then secondly, I want to lay a foundation that says all that Bob is going to speak about from a sociological and economic point of view is solidly standing within Catholic tradition and Catholic teaching. So I'm the hors d'oeuvre. Bob is the main meal portion here that you're about to receive. And we all have this handout, 2021 Know Your Faith series. Just to begin with what I'm guessing we all know and love to hear again and again. At the World Synod of Bishops in 1971, they said, action on behalf of justice and participation in the transformation of the world fully appear to us as constitutive. Constitutive, meaning that if you don't have flour, the cake doesn't turn out. It's an essential part of the recipe, as constitutive to the preaching of the gospel, or in other words, the church's mission of the redemption of the human race and its liberation from every oppressive situation. My words, that unless you're working for justice, you are not living a full Catholic Christian life. You are not fully a disciple of Christ. That it's just core to what we mean when we say we're here to bring the kingdom. And for those who aren't familiar, if you went to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, I know some people think, well, this Pope Francis has deviated and these Second Vatican Council's gone off the deep end. Well, let's go back to the Catechism of the Catholic Church, which gathers up the first 2,000 years of church's teaching. And if you were to read through that, the CCC in parentheses is the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Those are paragraph numbers. You could open up your catechism and turn to that paragraph and you would find these topics treated. This is just one list of people list different possible chief Catholic teachings and social concerns. But in this list, respect for human life, respect for human dignity. Let's think of Black Lives Matters, perhaps as a contemporary articulation of the principles involved. Social participation, maybe that's about voting rights and access to the polls. Again, core issue for we Americans right now. There's solid Catholic teaching about this. Preferential option for the poor. Solidarity, which we're treating tonight, would maybe stand as bookend to my rights. I have a right to this. I have a right to go to church. I have a right to go to a store. I have a right to not wear a mask if I don't want to. I have rights. This is America. We have individual freedoms. So that kind of bookends that. Stewardship of creation, subsidiarity, the common good as a large part of our discussion tonight. The rights of workers, the right to associate, maybe we're talking about unions. The larger Catholic Church, what a wonderful thing to be part of an international community. We don't get caught into just a particular country or period in history's point of view. We have this much bigger viewpoint on things. And so the church has often stood on the side of labor down through the centuries. So those are topics that are being addressed in this Know Your Faith series over the coming months. So we are talking about solidarity. And I just want to read a few paragraphs with you from the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Again, my point is simply to lay a foundation for what Bob is going to address shortly, that his point of view is solidly Roman Catholic. But to begin with there, point A, every human community needs an authority to govern it. The foundation of such authority lies in human nature, but authority's role is to ensure as far as possible the common good of society. The role of presidents, the role of congressmen is to assure the common good. That they're doing a good job when the common folk have a good life. Second addresses what is the common good. Second, the common good requires the social well-being and development of the group. It is the proper function of authority to make accessible to each what is needed to lead a truly human life. Food, clothing, health. Authority's job is to make sure people have access to health care, to honorable work, maybe a minimum wage, education and culture, suitable information, the right to have a family. Some of the things that government are morally bound to assure the common person has. See, coming into the world, people are not equipped with everything they need for developing their bodily and spiritual life. We need others. Differences appear tied to age, physical abilities, intellectual or moral aptitudes, the benefits delivered from social commerce, and the distribution of wealth. Talents are not distributed equally. These differences belong to God's plan. God wills that each receive what they need from others, and that those endowed with particular talents share the benefits with those who need them. These differences encourage and often oblige people to practice generosity, kindness, the sharing of goods. They foster the mutual enrichment of cultures. I find this quite radical. This notion that it's not everybody for themselves. It's not lift yourself up by your bootstraps, young lady. It's not if you're poor, it's because you're lazy. It's everybody is made differently so that we have to take care of each other, that none of us can do it on our own, that we're only going to make it if we all go there together. So that's all by God's plans, built-in inequalities requiring us to not go it alone, but to take care of each other. Solidarity, you could call that our first thought, our thinking has to go beyond ourself to the well-being of others. E, there exist also sinful inequalities. All of what we talked about is natural, God designed. Now we turn to the world human beings have created. There are also sinful inequalities that affect millions of men and women. These are an open contradiction of the gospel. Their equal dignity as persons demands that we strive for fairer and more humane conditions. Excessive economic and social disparity. The 1% that has now the same wealth as, I don't know what the figure is, Bob will tell us, 50% of the world. Economic disparity between individuals and peoples of the one human race is a source of scandal and militates against social justice, equality, human dignity, as well as social and international peace. Solid, basic, fundamental Roman Catholic teaching. And even more radical, going back, St. John Chrysostom, Gregory the Great, back 100 years. St. John Chrysostom vigorously recalls, not to enable the poor to share in our goods is to steal from them and deprive them of life. The goods we possess are not ours, but theirs. The demands of justice must be satisfied. First of all, that which is already due in justice is not to be offered as a gift of charity. I think that's very powerful. When we attend to the needs of those in want, we give them what is theirs, not ours. We're not performing works of mercy. We are paying a debt in justice. My last comment, G. Socioeconomic problems can be resolved only with the help of all forms of solidarity. Solidarity of the poor among themselves, solidarity between rich and poor, solidarity among workers, solidarity between employers and employees, solidarity among nations and peoples. International solidarity is a requirement of the moral order. World peace depends in part upon this. So forgive me for just reading at you, but I just wanted to make sure the Catechism of the Catholic Church spoke loud and clear, and we have a sense of where the church is coming from when it talks about solidarity as Catholics. With that, I turn this over to Bob.
Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you all for coming out in this wonderful evening. I'm sure you have a nice walk you could take or a nice drive you could take, but we're so glad you're here in person and with us on Zoom. I'm so glad Father Steve laid the foundation, said it was radical. Well, the gospel is radical. Jesus was a radical. But radical, I think, is maybe a pejorative word. I mean, there are destructive radicals and there are constructive radicals. And I think by laying this foundation, we see that we can be constructive, we can be constructive, we can work for the common good. In a culture where we really want to emphasize the individual's good, individual interest. This is a very individualistic society. Alexis de Tocqueville, the Frenchman who toured this country in the early 19th century, was just struck by our individualism. He wrote the book Democracy in America, a classic. And we are the land of individualism. So it's harder here, much more difficult here culturally to talk about the common good. It's much more likely, much more common to talk about individual interests. But the Catholic Church and its social teachings, and the theme of this series is about the other view. It's about perhaps the road less traveled, but a road that at this moment in history is the road that looks like it's rising. We may be at one of those paradigm or philosophical shifts that happen in history. I'll have more to say about that later. So with that little introduction, can we go to the first slide? And if I go like so, Tracy, people will see my pointer, okay? No.
The people here will, but not us.
Yeah, but they won't. Okay, I've got an old-fashioned school pointer because it won't take my laser. The screen won't take my laser. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to draw upon stalwart Catholics, traditional Catholic teaching from Popes Leo XIII, John Paul II, and Francis. I'm going to rely upon the U.S. Catholic bishops and others and other influences, which promote the premise that every economy must have a moral core, a moral core and purpose. Okay? And the key Catholic moral principle is that the economy is here to serve people. People are not here to serve the economy. And that's, again, it's in the encyclicals. It's in Catholic social teaching for a long time. We can have a good economy. We're not opposed to a good economy. But we're also very much in favor of human solidarity. We're in favor of a healthy and prosperous citizenry, a healthy and prosperous society. Scarcity is not the problem today. Economic scarcity has been a problem that haunted human beings for a long, long time. We've pretty much in the rich countries, for most of the people, got to qualify this, we've pretty much solved the scarcity problem through our economic systems, agricultural systems, production systems. The problem today is the distribution in the rich countries, distribution of those resources. And of course, the rich countries have a lot of their wealth from the poorer countries, the North and the South, which as you know, Pope Francis is very concerned about. In Laudate Si, for example. So yes, distribution is the issue. Who gets what? Who gets what and why? We'd like to think in this society, given our individualism, that it's purely your initiative. It's purely what you want. If you don't get what you want, or let's say if you're poor, there must be something wrong with your individual initiative. But there's a lot of fallacy in that argument. It sounds great. It sounds culturally correct, but we'll come back to it again. So we need solidarity with our human beings because we're after the common good. We're after what the Gospels teach us to do, what the Catechism urges us to do. Now, the capitalist economy, or what Pope Francis refers to again and again as the market economy. And by market, he means, supply and demand. He really means capitalism. The US is the world's largest and most dominant economy, period, but it's a capitalist economy. Now, there are three kinds of market economies. There isn't just one capitalism. People say, well, this is capitalism. No, this is a version of capitalism. The first version is social capitalism, not socialism, social capitalism. The European Union has this version of capitalism. Canada does, and we did. The United States did between the 1930s and the early 1980s. I'm going to come back to that. There's state capitalism. That's China. That's Vietnam. That's the old USSR. The states over there run their companies for profit. They run them, like they were Wall Street companies. In fact, China has huge stock markets. You can buy stock in Chinese state-owned companies. I think Singapore has the world's second biggest stock market after New York. And there's 3 or 4 different big stock markets in China, but they're state-owned. It's really it's a very strange hybrid. The stockholders are mainly the state, but you can buy shares too in Chery Auto. Chery is an automobile company in China. Then there's our capitalism, individualistic capitalism. It's the USA before the New Deal and about since the 1980s. Bottom line oriented. As little government and as much deregulation as possible. Trickle down economics, give to the rich and it trickles down. Low taxes on the rich, low wages and benefits for the many, minimal safety net for the poor and the middle class. It's also known as neoliberalism. Now you say, what do you mean liberal? Well, in the 18th century, the liberals were people like Adam Smith, the great economist, Adam Smith, who in the coincidental year of 1776 writes a book called The Wealth of Nations. And in The Wealth of Nations, he lays down what a free enterprise economy should be like. And we were a new country looking for an economy. We didn't want the existing economy, which was called mercantilism. It was controlled by the king or the queen. And they would give licenses to businesses. They would control who got a license to trade tea in India. The East India Company or the Dutch East India Company. The crown would control that. And of course, the crown would take a cut called a royalty. And we still use the term royalty. But the merchants, mercantilism, merchants, the traders, and we're also trading slaves, I'm sorry to say, they said to the government, to the crown, laissez-faire, laissez-faire. Let us do what we want. Get off our back with all these regulations and these policies and these papers and those papers and this charter and that charter. Just let us be free. Well, Adam Smith took that, codified it, and said that everything will be much more efficient if we just let economics go without regulations or the minimal regulations. We don't want people putting some kind of a foul product into wheat. No, we can't have that. And we must regulate against monopoly because Adam Smith said, if you let the businesses go, if you let them go, they'll buy each other out. The big fish will swallow the small fish, and pretty soon you'll have monopoly. The antithesis of capitalism, which is based on competition, free competition. And you'll compete and you'll drive prices down, you'll invent new mousetraps, and everybody will benefit and we'll have almost a utopian situation. That was Adam Smith. And these were the liberals in 1776. The conservatives were the mercantilists and the royalists, the crown people. People like Colbert, Louis XIV's finance minister, Colbert, like Stephen Colbert, right? So they were the liberals. So that's why we call it neoliberalism. Let it rip. let it rip, and all will be well, okay? Pope Francis argues in Laudate Si that an economy should not be individualistic and, quote, celebrate greed as the central principle. He says the current situation is not sustainable economically, socially, or environmentally, because Laudate Si is a very important environmental document. But it's on the environment and global inequality. So he sees those as two sides to the same coin. Now, little history. A monumental shift happened in the 1930s in the United States. I'm sure you know about it. It was the end of the old deal. You probably have never heard of the old deal. But before you can have a new deal, you need an old deal. What was the old deal? Well, it was neoliberalism. Low wages, long hours, no public safety, little regulation of business. Certain businesses were regulated by then, by the 30s. We did have Sherman antitrust, for example, Clayton antitrust, anti-monopoly laws. And few benefits. We really didn't have, a social safety net. We did have workman's comp. Wisconsin is the first state to have workman's compensation in 1911. Mandated from Washington, because there were so many workmen injured, and every state had to have their own program. And we still have workman's comp, but that was about it. There was no welfare state. Here comes the New Deal, beginning in 1932 with Franklin Roosevelt's election. We get higher wages. We get shorter hours, a bigger safety net, more benefits. Workers have a right now to unionize, which they did not have a right before 1935, actually. This is part of the New Deal. The ordinary people, said Roosevelt, are going to get a piece of the pie. Because heretofore, the great profits, and this is an incredibly profitable economic system. I mean, one thing about free enterprise and capitalism, it generates tremendous wealth and tremendous profits. We cannot deny that. No other system can do that. But the question is, who gets what and why from this system? Distribution. So the average guy and average gal are going to get a piece of the pie. Now, unfortunately, it doesn't apply as much to minorities, as you might know. But we're going to spread it around a little wider. And poof, the large middle class is born. I hope you know here in this room and online that we are among the first generation in history to be born into a massive middle class in history. The massive middle class did not exist really until after 1950, till after the war was over, World War II was over. We take the middle class for granted, and it really is very recent, okay? We had a small middle class before 1950s. Doctors, lawyers, dentists, small business owners, teachers were lower middle class, okay? The vast majority of folks were working class, which really meant lower middle or upper lower class, skilled and unskilled. The very large majority of us were poor. Very large majority of Americans were poor. About 1/3 of the country in 1920 was poor. In 1932, about 1/2 of us were poor because of the Great Depression. But by 1955, thanks to the New Deal and the post-war expansion, I must add, 1/2 the country identified as middle class. I think most of us tuned in tonight call ourselves middle class. It's a very wide range. There is upper middle class, there is lower middle class, there is middle class. But this never happened before. It's a tribute to the power of our economy, of our natural resources, of the land that we confiscated, which had all the resources on it and which we exploited, of the government's key role in that, key role in all that. The federal government played a huge role in spending money after the war to pump up this economy. In fact, the federal government did the same thing in Europe with the Marshall Plan. So, you know, it was a real triumph of economic redevelopment, conversion from making tanks to making Chevys. But there it was. By the mid-50s, we were on our way to becoming a middle-class society. And then Europe follows us later, much later. I mean, it was not much later, but later. Okay. The post-New Deal, post-World War II, middle-class world. Listen, I want you to realize how it was not only a utopian idea, it was a dangerous idea. It was considered really a problem. Most folks would be middle class, that's preposterous. The poor would have a hand up and a way out of poverty, never happened. Have an 8-hour day, fair wages, union membership, paid vacation, pensions, not so. This is socialism. This is communism. This would be against nature and God. Be the end of our democracy. This is what was said. Roosevelt was thought to be certainly a communist or a socialist. There was a coup. There was a coup planned against Franklin Roosevelt's administration, to be led by a general and by a series of military folks, one of whom told the FBI about it and foiled it. Google FDR coup, C-O-U-P, and you'll see a very interesting chapter in our history. It was foiled. He was seen to be a traitor to his class. The very wealthy thought he was a traitor to his class because Roosevelt was a patrician. He was part of the American aristocracy. And we do have an aristocracy. But it would certainly be the end of our democracy. But look, this is precisely what happened. And it wasn't the end of the world. In fact, the world turned much better. And you and I are the beneficiaries among the beneficiaries of that. However, another major shift in 1980. Liberalism becomes the dominant form again, as it was pre-New Deal. Deregulation. And you get mergers, takeovers, an increase in pollution. You get huge tax cuts for the wealthy, tax cuts for corporations. Capital mobility, that is, business investments start going overseas. That's globalization. Globalization, which is good for those countries, but not so good for all the plants that we've lost here. There are other ways to do globalization without it being a zero-sum game. We win, they lose. It can't be win-win, and we've done win-win, but it was largely, a lot of it was win-lose. So we lose steel in Pittsburgh, but now we're importing tons of steel from Korea and Brazil and Japan. A weakened safety net for the poor and the middle class. Low wages and de-unionization. I'll show you some union figures eventually. We've always had low unionization rates in the US. We never exceeded 1/3 of our workforce unionized. That's back in the 50s. And so right now, we'll talk about it again, but right now the American workforce is about 10% unionized. And if you go to the private corporations, it's 6%. The reason it's 10% is because the government businesses, government agencies are largely unionized, teachers and whatnot. We have really about the lowest unionization rate, and it's been going down, down, down. More about that. So it's been a move backward to the pre-New Deal, to neoliberalism. Greed is good, once again. Self-interest, individualism are now dominant values once again. A key civic principle is this: in the new era, if each individual protects his personal interest, the public interest will automatically be taken care of. Take care of yourself and everything will be fine. The public interest, but it doesn't happen that way. It's a false civic principle. So the economy since 1980, it was the end of the New Deal social contract. There was a quote unquote social contract. It wasn't written and signed. It was implied. It was a moral a moral understanding, really. Workers do their job, management and owners do their jobs, like investing properly in new mousetraps, new technology. There's enough prosperity for everyone. Minorities, I'm sorry to say, accept it. Social mobility is possible and reliable. You can climb the social class ladder. Hard work pays off. Workers join unions, which provide protection and bargaining power for the American dream. And the federal and state governments regulate business in the public interest, airlines, auto safety, environmental issues, less so on the environment early on. And they provide infrastructure and safety, education, highways, parks, and then the big four: Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, and food assistance, and workman's comp is also in that, but that goes way back. These are all fairly new. Most of those listed there since 1930. All those listed there since 1930. Well, now here's some data. I'm going to throw some data at you rather quickly. What happens in 1980? I'm going to get out my handy dandy pointer here. I feel like Sister Annunziata, who was my 8th grade teacher. Okay, have a look. 1980. That's the new shift. This is an index. We make everybody equal through the magic of statistics. Everybody has the same income back here in 1947. 1947. This is a trick you can do with statistics. We make everybody equal. And then we see how unequal they get in real terms, and that's taking into account inflation. Inflation means your real buying power, $1947 buying power. Okay, and we see what happens, and you see how the inequality begins to grow after 1980. I mean, everybody's going up pretty much the common good pretty much until 1980, and then the 20 percentile is flat, really flat since 1980. The middle groups, the middle class, these are the poor, the more middle class, is up a little bit. But the top 5% up and up. Next one. This has to do with corporate profits. Okay, corporate profits. Here's 1980. This is 1960, and it's up and it's down, and there's a recession. It's down, and then 1980 happens. It stays really kind of straight. Until 1990, and then it goes up and it heads up, and there it goes up and up and up. That's corporate profits after tax. That doesn't really click in 1980. It does shoot up in 1980, if you'll see, but then it goes down and it wobbles. Then it really takes off right around the year 2000. Personal wage and income as a percent of gross domestic product, that's the size of our economy, between 1960 and the year 2000, down. Our economy's grown bigger, wages have not kept up. Growing inequality between 82 and 2000. This is as productivity has grown. Here's productivity. That is output per person hour. We have good statistics. Good statistics on output per person. Okay. Should I do this, Tracy? Productivity is going up. The average wage since 82. This is real. This is real wages, taking into account inflation. Not up much between 82 and 09. But the average income of the top 1% is just skyrocketing. There was a recession here, as you remember. Just going up by leaps and bounds. So the rich are getting richer. Real, okay, that's taking into account inflation. Average hourly wages for young college graduates, something that, as a professor, I'm interested in. By gender, between 2000 and 2014. The years vary with all these. That's how the data is reported. All right, here's women. This is in buying power dollars, okay? And at $17 down to 15 something and change. Everybody, $18, $40, $16.99. Men from 19 up down to, they lost, the 8 cents. Ups and downs because there were recessions, okay? But wages going down or staying even at best. What I'm saying, what I'm talking about here is God also has political implications that I'm going to talk about. Next one, we are at, let's see. Yeah, here's income inequality between 1920 and 2010. I love these real long ones. This is basically a whole century here. Okay, the top 1%, the richest 1%. You can see when the Great Depression happened in 1929 with the stock market crash, they had doggone just that 1%, maybe 23% of the national income. 23% roughly. The Great Depression, the Wall Street crash of October 29, they lose a lot of that. But then they rebound, and then starts the New Deal, where we tax them at very high rates, and there they are, until 1980. There's 80. Back up. Now, there's a dip. There's a dip in recessions. You can see the dips, and now back up again. And that only goes to 2010, because that's what the data says. This is the top 0.5%. The top 0.5%. And it's very similar, very similar. They have a huge share of the income. This is before tax income, before taxes. And by the way, we have the lowest taxes on the rich of any of the advanced countries. Why the rock stars, movie stars moved to California. Rupert Murdoch's an American citizen. We have the lowest taxes and tons of loopholes, tons of loopholes. Part of this has to do, the slide in income, with the deunionization. As the labor force grew between 1930 and 1999, here it is, big steep climb. The union membership goes down, 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 down. So by the year 2000, it was down to about 14%. As I say today, it's down to just over 10% overall. So it continues to fall. How do we stack up internationally? Okay. Well, you can see we're at the bottom of the heap in this select group. The US has about 10%. This is in 2018. Of our workforce, total workforce is unionized. That, if we put in government, if we just separate out government employees, it's more like about 20%, 25%. Of course, Wisconsin government employees are no longer unionized, as of just a few years ago. But Iceland usually leads the pack, 90%, Sweden 66, Belgium 54, Italy 34. Canada's 25. Some people are surprised at Germany. It was only 16.7, but Germany has a very interesting thing. When a union bargains a wage for, let's say, an auto parts company, all the other auto parts companies by law must pay that wage whether they're unionized or not. So it's kind of a disincentive to join unions in Germany because, you know, these guys are paying dues and you're not, but you're getting the same wage increase. And other countries are like that too. France is very low at 7.9. Very low. In the US, the declining unionization was responsible for about 1/3 of the growth, or I should say the decrease in the growth in wage inequality among men between 73 and 2007. So 1/3 of men's wages, and just looking at men now, because they were the most unionized. 1/3 of their decrease had to do with the busting of unions. Okay, the root of American inequality, according to this graph, is the detachment from productivity. Throughout history, when productivity went up, more output per person, thanks to machines, thanks to harder work, thanks to better management. When productivity went up, wages went up. That's been the historical, not anymore. Here's the real hourly compensation that's taking into account inflation. Between 1972 and 2012, it's up ever so slightly. Well, there's a lot of money being made here. Somebody's making the money, and it's not the hourly workers. Distribution of average income growth during expansions. All right, these are the expansions. Going way back to 1949. This is post-war. Now, this is the bottom 90% in black. They're in black. And they come out of these expansions very well. You see it, you see it going up and going up and going up until 1982. When suddenly the top 10%, that's the gray bar. Now the top, these in 2009, 2012, the top 10% are doing extraordinarily well. This is the paradigm shift that I'm talking about to the return to neoliberalism. Stock exchange between 1965 and 1921. I like these long ones. I'd like it to be longer, but this is pretty long. And you can see the ups and downs. The economy goes into recessions and in boom times. They pulled out 20 and 21 over here. I mean, it's over here, but they've magnified it here, so you can see how it went terrible and bounced way up. Stock market is way up. Record levels right now. So it's ups and downs, but the trend is the trend is there. There's a lot of money being made in the stock market, a lot of money being made in this society. Who's getting it? The Gini index is an internationally known index. It measures the percentage of income of the top 10%, richest 10% of a country, the ratio compared to the bottom 20%, the poorest 10%. Ratio of rich to poor, okay? The US always does terrible in these Gini index. Here we are down here. We're not as bad as Russia. We're not as bad as Mexico. But we're nowhere near as good as Australia, Canada, France, Germany, very low. We're about a little bit better than Israel and Italy. Netherlands, much fairer, which means that you don't have these massive gaps between top and bottom. It's narrower. Now, why? Are they just harder workers in these other? No. It's national policies. It's national laws. It's values. It's morals, because you base your laws upon your morals, at least in part. Poverty rates, same comparison, same countries. Well, we're not as bad as Mexico, we're not as bad as Russia, but we're third. We're third. Here it's about 16.5% when this was done, and this was in this was actually in 2011. So that was in a recession time. Poverty's down now to about 11%, 12%. That was a recession number. But it was recession all over the world. Stock market crash in George Bush II's last year. So we are well known for poverty. We're well known for inequality as a society, among the greatest inequality and among the largest poverty. And again, these aren't my opinions. I've been looking at this data for decades. The data has not changed much. Poverty rate by race. Among blacks, I want you to look back here even to 1959. Over 55% of blacks were poor in 1959. We have made progress, ladies and gentlemen. It's flattened out a lot, but the overall trend has been down, ups and down. And in 2019, the black poverty rate was 18%. The Hispanic poverty rate is 15.7%. The Asian poverty rate is 7%. And the so-called white poverty rate is 7%. Now I'm going to say something that's very important. 7% of the white population is a lot of people, because the country is still about 70% so-called white. And that's very controversial, the whole whiteness question. You know, the Irish were not considered white in 1840. Poles weren't considered white, you know, by Germans and Russians in 1930s. You know, Eastern Europeans, Southern Europeans. In fact, Northern Italians don't consider Southern Italians white. So who's white? Are Jews white? There's a whole literature on this, a whole book on this. So I always like to use the word white in parentheses. And a lot of this nonsense about whites being replaced in 30 years' time is just nonsense. All these Hispanics coming in, oh, you know, and all these people from South America and Asia, pretty soon, whites, well, who are the whites? The whites are the Irish people who weren't white in 1880. The Polish people, who Hitler said, well, they're only good for being my farmers. They're an inferior species. Okay? And the Welsh, I mean, the English thought the Welsh were an inferior lot. It happened all over the place. And they passed laws about this. Okay? So this replacement theory, what's going to happen is we're going to have a lot of immigration from a lot of places, and we're going to intermix, just like the Poles married the Italians and the Slovaks, you know, married the Spanish, and pretty soon they're white. Pretty soon they're all whites, and pretty soon they're worried about the colors. Well, we may have some darker shaded people in the decades ahead. I mean, a lot of those Sicilians who came in Spanish were pretty dark skinned too, but there's no big deal about it. So that's what's going to happen. So don't fall for that replacement. You know, it leads to racism. It's based upon racism. It's based upon white superiority. And who are the whites? Okay, who are the whites really? If you study history, you see how fallacious that really is. Okay, so anyway, the non-Hispanic whites, which really refer to Europeans, I don't like the word white, the Europeans, they're down to 7, but they're a lot of people. So most of the poor, this is the point I was trying to make, most of the poor in the United States are white. Because 7% of 70% may be down to 65% European now, is a lot of people. It's more people than 18% of the black population, which is only, you know, I think it's about 13 or 14 million. The country has 35 million now, 335 million. And 2/3 of those at least are whites. So 7%, but the white poverty is very invisible. It's in Appalachia. It's in the countryside. It's in northern Wisconsin. It's not in big cities where a lot of the black poverty is, and the media aren't there to report it. And there's a lot of prejudice, again, with regard to poor people generally, including against whites, you know, the hillbilly stereotype. The countries with the highest social mobility. Ladies and gentlemen, the US used to be the place to come for social climbing, for social mobility. No more. No more. The era of neoliberalism that we've had, that was really brewing in the 1970s, late 1970s. It didn't just begin in 1980. If you look at the graph here, Denmark is, this is a study done by a German outfit called Statista, a very reliable and solid company. You can Google them and get all kinds of statistics. Corporations buy their statistics governments by their statistics. Denmark has a score of 85 in this index that they've created, this score they created. Norway's 83.6, Finland, Sweden, the Scandinavian countries, Iceland, Netherlands, Switzerland, and we're down there at 70, which means that we have much less upward mobility here. Now we've got more upward mobility than Mexico, because all the countries are rated. I'm just taking a sample here to compare apples with apples. We don't want to compare ourselves to Mexico because it's a developing nation. We're a developed nation, supposedly. So it's really, really hard to climb here. And you can see some of the reasons with what I've been talking about. Tracy, if you would. So this has implications for democracy, implications for solidarity. For democracy to thrive, we need a fair and just economy for all. The working poor, and you know we have the lowest minimum wage of the rich countries, the lowest, 7.25. New Zealand just raised theirs to, I think it's $22 an hour. It's the high teens in Australia. The EU average is about 12 to 15. It's 7.25, although states can raise it in the US, certain states, but the federal minimum is 7.25. Okay? The working poor, you can work 40 hours a week, but at minimum wage, you're going to be poor. And we have one of the weakest safety nets. One of the weakest safety nets. Of course, we're the only rich country with no health care for everybody. The only one. Why can't we afford health insurance for everybody? Other folks have figured it out. We're the richest country in the world, and we at any time have, well, the data vary, we have between 30 and 45 million people with no health insurance. How's that possible in the richest country in the world? What does that say about solidarity? We have to restore, oh yeah, and the shrinking middle class and the huge concentration of wealth in the top. There's no contest, it's incontestable how we've been shifting money to the top. The data are there for decades. I mean, I've been following it, teaching it. Check it out yourself online. You can do it very easily. We have to restore countervailing power. Organized labor has been looked at by political scientists and economists as an important countervailing power against corporate power. Sure, corporations want to get what they want, but labor needs what it wants, and communities need what they need. We need more countervailing power. It's called countervailing power in political science circles. And there's the money in politics. As Will Rogers, you may have heard of Will Rogers, the humorist. We have the best politics money can buy, says Will. You know about Citizens United, the Supreme Court decision in 2010 that opened Pandora's box. Corporations can give whatever they want. They can literally buy elections. And they spend money on both sides, make no mistake about it. And they essentially replaced, with Citizens United, they replaced McCain-Feingold Act of 2002, which put limits on a lot of this, especially the soft money, the so-called soft money. Then there's dark money. No one spends as much on elections as the United States. No one is even close. Most countries don't allow campaign contributions. They don't even allow it. In England, when I lived in England with students, the BBC would allow so much time for each candidate free of charge for their campaigns, commercials. You couldn't buy time. You couldn't buy time. Now you can buy time on independent TV in England. They're getting much more like us. But on the continent, they regulate that very tightly. And furthermore, they only have elections. Their elections are like 3 or 4 months. They're different kind of democracies. Our elections, I think they're already running for the next election, aren't they? Ours go on for 3 or 4 years. Over there, they're 3 or 4 months by law. So the advertising is very little. And I mean, the advertising time is very little, and they really put clamps on it. And they have, in the case of the BBC, basically government funding of campaign commercials. We used to have, I think we still have that. But if you take it, there's all kind of matching problems. Okay. So Citizens United has been a pain in the neck. Saving democracy too. There's a real concern about our democracy given the economic trends. Anger and frustration among the middle class has been growing. You know about the angry white guy, the angry white gal? The Trump movement, I think, was a reflection of this. And I'm not being political, I'm being descriptive. I know from what I speak. Hang on one second. Many of his supporters are among those who felt left behind by the economy. Wages aren't going up. You know, my car's old. I mean, no, my benefits are not there. I'm sick and I don't have any health care. Who's to blame for this? For my predicament? Well, could be those immigrants. Could be those poor people. It could be those minorities, especially if I'm predisposed to racism. My hometown, ladies and gentlemen, Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, Luzerne County, Pennsylvania. Ben Bradley Jr., who you may know the name Ben Bradley. His father was the editor of the Washington Post during the Watergate era. And many of us in this room, and I'm sure online, remember Watergate. This is Ben Bradley Jr. I believe he's managing editor of some administrative position at the Boston Globe. Okay, Ben Bradley Jr. wrote a book called The Forgotten about my hometown area. Luzerne County, coal country, anthracite coal country. I happened to be in town 3 years ago when he spoke about it, heard him speak. He had people on the podium who he interviewed. He interviewed over 100 people. You can buy this book on Amazon, The Forgotten. It's about 15 bucks. It's a good read. And they are called the Forgotten. And they feel like they have been left behind. A once solid, democratic, coal mining, unionized area. It's devastated by deindustrialization, losing all their industries. It's now a lot of warehousing, minimum wage jobs, immigrants coming in from Mexico and South America, Eastern and Southern Europeans whose own parents were terribly discriminated against, now very racist against the Mexicans, don't know their own history, but they're taking our jobs, and I'm paying taxes to support them. I have relatives like this. Hard to talk to. But all this inequality growing since 1980 has come home to roost. And here it is. However, I think that we have some optimism to possibly look at. Can you go forward again, Tracy? Uh-oh. Wrong way. Keep going. Okay, I just want to show you one more slide about our democracy. This is the campaign spending between the year 2000 and 2020. And you can just see how much money is in our politics. That's the red's presidential and the gray is congressional races. The best politics money can buy, says Will Rogers. No other country has this. People are trying to buy influence. Well, what are they trying to buy? Trying to protect their interests. This is not the way to build solidarity or economic justice. And here's the graph on campaign contributions by the top 0.1%, the top 1% campaign contributions going up and up and up. Their income's gone like this, but their campaign contributions have gone like that. So Catholic social teaching asks, can we make America work for everybody, not just those at the top? Can we develop solidarity with all groups, classes, and ethnicities? Can we be less divisive as a nation in a fairer democracy? Well, folks, I think our democracy, our economy, and our planet, which I haven't said much about the environment, depend on it. A better economy and society is possible. How do we get there? Through major changes in political, economic, and social institutions. It has often happened before. We changed the world many times before. There are no more kings, by the way. No more queens. I mean, if you can change the world being organized around monarchy, you can change anything in society. That institution was so entrenched, it's beyond belief. It goes back to the pharaohs. But now we elect people. It still has its tremendous flaws, but it's better than monarchy. So we have brought major structural change. That's just one glaring example. Than many others. I mentioned the New Deal. Through understanding and teaching about the moral economy, through a change of values and morals and attitudes and norms, that's how you bring about a better economy in society. And this is where I see a vital role for the Catholic Church. Because the church is one of the key institutions in society. The church is aware of the need for the moral economy. Father Steve pointed that out from the Catechism. And the need for social solidarity. The church is aware of racial and ethnic prejudice, economic injustice, and I will add the need to protect the environment. The church has over 100 years of Catholic social teaching to rely upon. The church has thousands of parishes and religious orders and colleges and universities and newspapers and charities and social programs and retreat centers. What an infrastructure. What a vast, vast network. Is anybody's bigger? I don't know. I asked the question rhetorically. A vast network that can be called upon to foster economic justice for all and to promote it and to teach about it and to act as though it really mattered. Thank you very much.
Bear with us for a minute while we switch from PowerPoint to the video feed.
I guess if we have questions, I can open it up for people to, or I can just open everybody up.
I think we'll open everybody up and see.
Those online people are very quiet.
Yeah, they are because we shut them off.
What?
Because we didn't want to hear their chairs squeaking or their papers rustling or.
So Bob, you make the comment, I cut up on the screen that you think a new era in social and political environmental justice is dawning. Bob, on your sheet, you say you believe a new era in social, economic, political, environment justice is dawning. You see signs of hope in what's happening. Would tell us about that.
Yeah, I think we might have skipped over that slide. I'm glad you brought it up. Yeah, I do believe this is one of those inflection points. One of those inflection points in human history where the stars are aligning, if I can get a little poetic, between a lot of events in our society, elections, personnel, crises. Crises is a great agent of change. I think it may be a very possible time when we may be going in a different direction. The highfalutin term is a paradigm shift. Just like we had a paradigm shift between, am I on? Oh, I'm not on camera now. Okay, just so we act like we had a paradigm shift between the New Deal era and the post-New Deal. That was a paradigm shift, a major shift in economics and values and morals. Cultures go through these ups and downs, and I think, Father Steve, that we are at one of those moments where there could be significant change in laws, in attitudes and values, in solidarity. I'm hopeful that it really is one of those historic moments, much like, much like the 1960s were.
What would you name, if we're leaving neoliberalism, what are we going into?
If we're leaving neoliberalism, and by the way, I invite you to go online. There's some wonderful lectures about neoliberalism online from economists and sociologists. It's really all a buzz, and on TED Talks and other YouTube. Search it on YouTube. You'll learn a lot about this economic system, which is really a failed economic system. Because all it does is produce more and more inequality and harm to the environment, and less solidarity. There are other ways. I think what we need to go to is more of the social capitalist model. Now, it won't be like Canada's, and it won't be like Germany's, and it won't be like Holland's. They have stock markets. It's not socialism. This is a good point. Germany is not socialism. Holland's not socialism. Sweden, 95% of the businesses in Sweden are privately owned by individuals or by stockholders. Sweden's not a socialist economy. Socialism is when government owns businesses. Like when you and I took over General Motors and Chrysler in the last years of the Bush administration, first years of the Obama administration. You and I own those two major automobile companies. We bought all their stock. Why? Because they were going to go bankrupt if we didn't. And we saved their jobs. Now, pure capitalism, they'd be gone. But we ended up using a social capitalist model to buy that stock, which we then sold back in 5 years' time at a loss, I might add. But hey, it's only taxpayers' money. And so that's socialism. Now in Sweden and Norway and England, they do have socialized medicine. The government does own the hospitals, and the vast majority of hospitals and the vast majority of clinics and the doctors and nurses, the vast majority are government employees. But Germany doesn't. Switzerland doesn't. Holland doesn't. These are nonprofit healthcare systems. You must be covered by a nonprofit health insurance company, and they must cover you to be treated by a nonprofit health clinic or a nonprofit hospital.
So how are you getting there?
Okay, so that is a different model of healthcare. Canada has single payer. Canada has Social Security for everybody, which is what Bernie Sanders wants, I think. Australia has the same thing. They call it Medicare. They stole our name, but for the whole society. So there's many different ways, but don't think that what I'm talking about, social capitalism, is not socialism. That's not socialism. We're not going to be socialistic in this country, ladies and gentlemen. It's not going to happen. And socialism has its own problems, because many government-run businesses are run very inefficiently. There is the discipline of the market, but it's got to be watched and it's got to be regulated. Harry.
In your review of times of history when there was a big paradigm shift, using that history, how do you see the paradigm shift that's going to happen in our country occurring and playing out over the next few years, given our particular situation with Biden and that? How would you predict that it's going to play out?
Okay. Well, I don't want to, get too political because I don't know what's going to happen with the Democrats' very slim lead in both the House and the Senate. Biden has big plans for trillion-dollar programs for infrastructure, social infrastructure, which he is linking with physical infrastructure for the first time. Social infrastructure, health, education, public welfare, social services. We've never talked about infrastructure that way. Infrastructure has always been bricks and mortar and pavement, and bridges. If he gets $3 trillion, this could have a significant effect on our social services and our human resources. But can he pass it? But he has what? He's already passed $1 trillion or so, and then he's got a couple more of those coming. He wants to spend big money. He wants to do really what Roosevelt did. Roosevelt did in the 1930s. Invest in the public, invest in ports and roads and people and education. And it will come back through higher quality of life, higher income, higher taxes paid when they make more money in their jobs. And the deficit, Harry, the deficit looms over this. And we can talk about the deficit, which is really not the big problem that it's been pumped up to be. We own most of our own deficit, although the Chinese own a chunk of it. We owe it to ourselves. That's good. We own about 2/3 of it to ourselves. We're borrowing to pay off the deficit at 1 or 2% interest, very low interest rates now. If you invest the deficit in productive things, then it pays for itself through higher taxes in the future, paid by those who benefit from that investment. But if you invest your deficit in military spending, for example, that's not productive. That's not like, a new highway, which allows, that's maybe a bad example for environmental reasons, but highway does produce much more efficiency for producers and consumers. So I don't know, Harry. I'm hopeful that the politics will facilitate this, but make no mistake that those who do not want to have a paradigm shift and those who want to maintain neoliberalist policies are mobilizing right now to protect them.
I think I'm going to take him out for a walk.
Please, any more questions? Please speak. Please feel free to speak up. I think Ray Nass has a question. Maybe not. This is Ray Nass. He's on mute. Ray's on mute. Any more questions from the video audience? Any questions from the studio audience? Paul.
Last night there was a special on medicine in America, and they have I think his name is Ashish Jha. There was a special last night on PBS on medicine, and I thought your challenging rhetorical question of who can counter the strength of the church with its equal justice, it was a dampening of enthusiasm to hear the comment by this new dean of Brown School of Public Health, who's frequently on television, that every town, the healthcare facilities are some of the most powerful elements of the town. And when you have a government arranged where congressmen are elected every 2 years, as the US, he posed that as a tremendous challenge to make change for the better. That was a disheartening comment, but I thought it was quite significant.
Yeah, I think it's a very good comment. I think it's a very good comment. You can have a minority of votes and still run a legislature because of the way the place is gerrymandered and district. That's also disheartening. I mean, there's a lot to be disheartened about. On the other hand, we did have a New Deal. We no longer have child labor which we had for hundreds and thousands of years. We finally outlawed that, by the way, in the New Deal. Certain states did it earlier. Okay, we have equal rights, at least regarded gender and aging and religion. At least we have some protections. I mean, we have made that progress, and there were people who fought against all that, Paul. So there are these inflection points. I think the next election will be crucial to this in Washington and in states, to see whether my sort of prediction for a paradigm shift will continue. It could be stymied. It could be stymied. I'm not ebullient with optimism, but I am optimistic. Questions? Donna.
Thank you, Bob. This was great. And I'm very interested in your point that the church is one of the key institutions in society. And the implication here, I think, is that the church can facilitate our sort of inflecting over that inflection point in a way that is away from neoliberalism and towards something that might be more distributively just, right? Yeah. Two things occur to me, well, three. One is how, right? How can we connect those dots? Especially, and here's what the other 2 points come in a world where in this very diocese, we have Father Altman, right? Where we have priests, where we have church leaders who have very vocally supported neoliberalism and the associated factors. I mean, it seems to me to be that just to kind of not close the loop, but to bring this back to the Know Your Faith series here, right? I mean, part of this might just be a lack of proper formation, a lack of understanding exactly what the Catechism says, exactly what it implies for our shared social life. But there is that. And then there's also the recent poll results that say that church attendance is declining. So I think that the fractured nature of the political landscape within the church, coupled with the declining in participation in the church, I'm just wondering what the church can do to facilitate the inflection in light of those two challenges. Do you have any insights there?
No, those are excellent questions, Donna. I mean, in one sense, it's not my business. This is the business of the Holy Spirit. I'm being facetious, of course. It's all of our business. But we have our faith. We have our faith. It sometimes, as Paul mentioned, with the politics of elections, the politics of the church can be disheartening. And yet, the Catholic bishops did write Economic Justice for All in 1984. And Ray Nass, whose picture is up there on the screen, Ray Nass traveled didn't travel, he went to Stevens Point, and he and I testified before this diocese inquiry about the economy and so forth. And we were involved with that. So that's a great document. I mean, I relied upon it tonight, Economic Justice for All. Rembert Weekland from Milwaukee, Archbishop, chaired that. And it had a huge counter reaction by the neoliberals, who really squelched it, who did not want that because it was socialistic and it was communistic and it was anti-individualistic and so forth and so on. And they pretty much snuffed it out. But that spirit's still there, and it's back. It's back now, I think. We'll see what happens this time with Pope Francis. In all fairness, Pope John Paul II, who I have great esteem for, and who I used in this, especially his labor exerciums encyclical on labor, tremendous encyclical, but the rights of labor and workers. and the right to unionize. The church has supported the right to unionize since Rerum Novarum in the 1890s, Leo the 13th. We've supported the right to form a labor union, okay? But not one with socialist or communist leanings. That was always the catch. And many laborites were socialists and communists in the early 20th century. But by 1950, very, very few, very, very few. In any case, John Paul II, he was not at all enthusiastic about economic justice for all because of the politics it implied. And so he appointed a lot of really conservative bishops and archbishops who weren't going to go anywhere with that, And it sort of died on the vine, that whole effort. A lot of enthusiasm, by the way, in the early 80s. As the paradigm was shifting to neoliberalism, remember Ronald Reagan's elected in 1980, and he institutes much of this, but it really began in the late 70s under Jimmy Carter, to be honest, the deregulation. Carter deregulated trucking, airlines, and I think those two major industries. Jimmy Carter took all the regs off those two. And then Reagan just kind of continued that, but he had massive tax cuts for the rich, massive tax cuts for the rich. In any case, it petered out. And I'm hopeful, though, that this time could be different, because I think we have a much bigger emergency this time, including the environmental emergency, which I really haven't spent much time on at all. But capitalism, and our version of capitalism, is very harsh on the climate crisis, because it's all about my interests. And I'm a great incentive to externalize my pollution on the public. Put it up in the air. Then it's their problem.
I think there's research out, Jonah, that says churches are growing that are socially engaged. That the current generation, you may know more this than I, that actually that's a principal concern of religiously active young people today. So, maybe church and social action has a future in the coming generation. And how are we doing time-wise, Marge?
Any other questions, please?
Bob?
Ray, no, go ahead, Ray.
Bob, you ended your presentation by saying that really have to rely on the church to step forward and do something about this. We all know how disappointed we were after economic justice for all when they promised to preach it from every pulpit, from every church in the country, promised to teach it from every classroom in every Catholic college and university in the country. It never happened. And I see the timidity, I'm not going to understand the timidity, because we ran into a couple not long ago who transferred parishes because they would not want to hear about environmentalism, social and economic justice, because abortion was the only thing that mattered to them. So there's going to have to be a real transformation of the church if these things are going to come about.
I agree, Ray, and I did not mention the abortion issue, but it really is implied in Father Steve's the dignity of life, the dignity of all life, the right to life. The same with the death penalty, which our church is now firmly against, capital punishment. And the same with the abortion issue. I mean, it's a life issue, right? But so is what I've talked about, a life issue. So are wages and opportunities and healthcare and control over your job through unions. These are all, I see them all as life issues. And as Catholics, we're pro-life. We're pro-life in all of its dimensions. But Ray, I see how it's split. I see how it cuts. There are some people who are one-issue voters, and we know, and I know you have a whole dissertation on the abortion issue and how it could have been eliminated a long time ago if folks really wanted to eliminate that Roe versus Wade. But certain political interests do not want to eliminate it because they keep Catholics voting for them to eliminate it. That's Ray Nass's thesis. Am I right, Ray?
Yes, Bob. Mary shut me off, Bob.
No, I just muted him.
I can't imagine why Mary would mute you, Ray.
Okay, do you want to add something?
No, that's it, Bob. Yeah, thank you.
Okay, that's Ray's thesis that there.
Bob, we don't have any sound from you. There you go.
About this very thing that I've said. How much longer are you going to wait for this? Is it real or is it just a political manipulation? Other questions from anywhere?
They have to share their video.
Okay,
Well, I can. I mean, what's left?
yeah, if you click on, okay.
Right, if they want to.
Okay, well, with that, I will turn it back to our Master of Ceremonies. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
The discussion that we ended with on pro-life and the dignity of human life is actually our topic for next month with Father Tom Lindner. He will talk about the teachings on the seamless garment of life from birth to natural death. So we hope that everyone who is here with us tonight will join us in one way, shape, or form next month, May 27th, for our next in the series. And thank you very much to Steve Bryce and to Bob Walensky for presenting tonight's discussion. Thank you, everyone, and we hope to see you next month.
Thank you.